afternoon and welcome.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon and welcome to the September 22nd, 2021 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us again and still in this remote meeting format we're using as our state and community continue to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'm going to turn it directly over to the city manager to introduce our one and only topic today, the Climate Action Plan 2.0.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really excited about today's work session. I know you and the community have a lot of interest in what we're doing around climate action. I get a lot of questions about this. So I'm joined today by Chelsea, and she will kind of walk us through a great update, and we look forward to hearing your comments on the work.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to go ahead and share some slides. Let's see. All right, Mayor Venice, I can see you. Can you see the slides okay? All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon. My name is Chelsea Clinton. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Eugene, and I'm here today presenting with Rob Innerfeld, the Transportation Planning Manager, and Anna Reed, an analyst from our Waste Prevention team, and also just a number of colleagues from across the city who help support our sustainability work, who can help answer questions today as they come up. So today we'll cover three main topics. First, I'll give a brief update on the sustainability program. Next, I'll review the Climate Recovery Ordinance, or the CRO, and where we are on our journey to meet our community-facing climate goals. And then last, and this is where we'll spend the bulk of our time, Anna, Rob, and I will review the CAP 2.0 12 additional strategies. So first up, the sustainability program update. This slide gives an overview of our planned fall work session schedule. As you can see, climate and sustainability will be a common topic. Aside from today, the EWEB City of Eugene joint work session scheduled for September 27th will touch on many of the topics related to sustainability. Then the Sustainability Commission will present their work plan to you in early November. I'll come back to you also in November to touch base on a number of CAP 2.0 topics, and we'll close out the fall by talking about funding for our climate work. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to spend most of our time on those 12 additional strategies. In November, I'll bring back updates on these three topics. I just wanted to give you a teaser today. So first, community engagement. The CAP 2.0 includes 6 community engagement initiatives. Most of them are ongoing, including the Shift Communications Campaign, the Eugene Climate Collaborative, the Equity Panel, the Sustainability Commission, and a number of reporting and communication items. I'll also bring back the CAP 2.0 implementation plan. As council requested last year, we'll bring back a formatted table with all the CAP 2.0 actions that includes emissions impact, cost, budget, and timeline for each CAP 2.0 action. And we'll also bring back a status update, but that will be coming back to you in January as part of the CAP 2.0 annual report. And then last, additional climate projects. I'll provide an update on a number of other projects that are happening, such as carbon offsets, other reports due in accordance with the CAP 2.0, and I'll touch on several of those today. And while you're waiting for a more comprehensive update on all of those items, I really encourage you to take a look at our program's new newsletter, the Eugene Climate Connection. We released the first issue of this newsletter last week, and our plan is to release this newsletter quarterly to provide updates on the CAP 2.0 projects, as well as other projects that support our climate goals. So next, I'll transition into the Climate Recovery Ordinance overview, or the CRO overview. It's been quite some time since we've reviewed the ordinance together, so we'll go over it quickly to make sure we're all on the same page on what the ordinance includes and where we are on our climate journey. So the CRO includes 4 goals summarized on your screen. So the first one is to be carbon neutral in our operations by 2020. The second is to reduce fossil fuel use in our operations, the city operations, by 50% by 2030 compared to 2010. The third is similar to the second, but it's community facing. So reduce fossil fuel use community-wide by 50% by 2030 compared to 2010. And then the last is to reduce community-wide emissions by 7.6% annually. And when we look out to 2030, that's about a 64% emissions reduction annually. I won't talk about the first two goals again after this slide today anyhow. So I'll mention that the city purchased carbon offsets to cover emissions from 2020 to meet the first goal. You can read more about that in the Eugene Climate Connection newsletter, and I'll talk more about that in November. And the remainder of the conversation will primarily focus on goal 4, which has a heavy overlap with goal 3. So the climate recovery thermometer is one way to track how we are meeting our community-wide CRO emissions reduction goals. It includes a lot of information, so I'll walk through it slowly. On the left, you can see that we're looking at a time horizon from 2010 to 2050. We include data from 2010 to provide some historical context, and 2017 is the baseline year for our CRO goal measurement, and the first year of data collection after the CRO emissions goal was passed in 2016. While the CRO calls for reductions through the year 2100, the goal is to achieve about 90% of those reductions by the year 2050. So we stop the graphic there for now. And on the right, you can see greenhouse gas emissions targets. These targets align with the CRO goal of a 7.6% annual emissions reduction. So the baseline number is 1,013,000 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. And in 2050, the goal is to emit 70,000 metric tons carbon equivalent or less. The width of the thermometer reflects the shrinking greenhouse gas emission targets over time. The bold horizontal red line shows our current emissions level. Our last data point is from 2019, and it reflects a small increase from our emissions in 2017. And just want to mention, we couldn't quite make it proportional on this graphic, but we did want to show there was a slight increase. This graph is another way to view our trajectory. So the solid green line on the left-hand side shows our emissions from 2010 to 2017. The little car there shows our 2019 emissions, and you'll see that's tracking fairly closely with the dashed yellow or dashed orange line. And that shows what we measured in 2017 to be our business as usual trajectory. That means if we did nothing, that's how much we expect our emissions to increase over time. And then the bottom dashed green line reflects the CRO goal. When we talk about our local emissions, they primarily come from 3 buckets: transportation, building energy, and fugitive emissions. You'll notice this is an organizing framework used frequently throughout the CAP 2.0, and it's what we'll use for the rest of this presentation. So I wanted to just take a moment to go over that. So you'll see transportation is our largest source of emissions. It has 53% of our local emissions, and those primarily come from gasoline and diesel fuel. Second is building energy, 32% of our local emissions, and those emissions primarily come from natural gas and a little bit from electricity. And then third, 15% of our emissions are fugitive emissions, and those come from waste and refrigerant leakage. Next, we'll move on to the CAP 2.0 12 additional strategies. I'll give a bit of background on these strategies as a whole and their history, and then Rob, Anna, and I will walk through each strategy. I would recommend taking a look at the table included in the AIS packet as attachment B at this point. Some of the information from that table will be included on the slides, but I could not fit it all on the screen. I'll also pause here to say that these strategies were developed in 2019. While it has only been about 2.5 years, a lot has changed. We've all felt that. So I'll give a few examples that I feel like are really pertinent to our context today. We know more about the climate crisis now than we did in 2019 and have science that affirms the urgency of the actions that are needed. As you're probably aware, the UN International Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, continues to publish reports on the climate crisis with updated science on the urgency of action needed. The 6th report of the Physical Science Basis released this summer calls for strong and sustained reductions in emissions for carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to limit the worst impacts of climate change. Another example of the changing landscape, our federal and state partners are planning to take more action. At the federal level, the Biden administration, as well as Congress, are considering large investments in infrastructure that will support emissions reduction nationally. At the state level, Governor Brown signed Executive Order 20-04 in March of 2020, calling on state agencies to use the full extent of their authorities to reduce emissions. As a result, a number of planning processes are underway at the state level that we hope will lead to emissions reductions, including the DEQ's Climate Protection Program and DLCD's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking Committee, just to name a few. And one last example of our changing context close to home, our community experienced the trauma that climate change is predicted to cause frequently firsthand with the holiday farm fires last summer. And we see that in the news, this is happening to many communities across the West each year. So as we head into reviewing these 12 strategies, you may have heard concerns that the data are from 2019 and they don't incorporate all the changes that have happened since then, both the new urgency as well as the new work being done. It's difficult at the local level to keep modeling up to date, but I think these strategies still hold as meaningful concepts to explore as next steps for climate action for our community. Know that as we work on any of these strategies, we dig back into the data and we work with partners and community members to understand the updated context and incorporate that into our recommendations to you. The CAP 2.0 includes about 115 actions from the city and other Eugene Climate Collaborative partners. The actions in the CAP 2.0 are actions that the city or other community partners committed to working on over the next 5 to 10 years. These 12 strategies represented on your screen and included in your packet are included in those 115 and were woven in according to the categories on the slide, which you may remember from a past council presentation. And I'll walk through those categories now just to remind us of the history of these strategies. So the blue strategies are strategies 1 through 3. We said we're moving forward as part of the Northwest Natural process, or I use the abbreviation here of NWN for folks watching at home. So that meant we paused exploring these strategies independently and brought them forward as concepts as we negotiated our franchise and climate agreement with Northwest Natural. That process is reflected in CAP 2.0 Action B1 and is still ongoing. The salmon colored, so we said would come back to council with more research or for policy direction or funding. And we will walk through the 4 strategies today in alignment with that thinking. The green color, staff were already moving forward on those items back in 2019. And we said pieces of that work would come back for policy direction and funding. And you'll hear more about those today as well. And last, the orange, carbon offsets will likely always be an option, and we'll keep it here as a long-term strategy. So moving into the details now, the first 3 actions, as I just mentioned, relate to Northwest Natural and natural gas. So I'll just give a quick overview of where we're at with that process. As you all know, we began negotiating a natural gas franchise renewal agreement and a climate agreement in late 2019 with Northwest Natural. And after several extensions, Northwest Natural's franchise with the city lapsed in May of 2021. Northwest Natural is currently preparing to file a voluntary emissions reduction program under SB 844 with the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. The city is a key stakeholder in that process. At this time, the hope is to complete that filing by the end of the calendar year. We'll jump to strategy 1. So first, the Smart Energy Program. Northwest Natural already operates a voluntary Smart Energy Program, which is a carbon offset program for natural gas customers. The strategy presented here is a mandatory program or an auto enrollment program where customers could opt out. The strategy is currently paused due to the Northwest Natural franchise work. Policy direction is needed if council would like to unpause the strategy or press go and have staff explore next steps for implementation. If council directs staff to move forward on this item, we will look into any legal requirements related to implementing the strategy, bring back a community engagement plan, and lay out a pathway to move it forward. The next strategy, number 2, is to regulate natural gas. The strategy presented here is around regulating new natural gas infrastructure. The estimates from the CAP 2.0 suggested that limiting new natural gas could reduce emissions by 40,000 metric tons annually by 2030. Similar to the first strategy, this strategy is paused due to the Northwest Natural franchise work. Policy direction is needed if council would like to unpause the strategy and move forward and have staff explore next steps. Again, like the first strategy, if council directs staff to move forward on this item, we would look into any legal requirements related to implementation, bring back a community engagement plan, and lay out a pathway to move it forward. Strategy 3 is to require Northwest Natural to fuel switch to biogas and renewable hydrogen. A 10% switch is modeled here, and the CAP 2.0 projected that this would reduce emissions by about 35,000 metric tons annually by 2030. Since proposing this strategy, the state landscape has changed a bit. In the 2019 legislative session, the Oregon legislature passed SB 98, allowing natural gas companies to procure renewable natural gas at a schedule included in the table in your packet and roll the costs into the rate structure. Northwest Natural is utilizing this legislation, and last week they shared that they have contracts in place for about 2% of their total supply to be renewable in the near future and have hopes to do more soon. Similar to the first 2 strategies, this strategy is paused due to the Northwest Natural franchise work. Policy direction is needed from council if you'd like to explore the strategy further. And again, like the first 2 strategies, if council directs staff to move forward on this item, we will look into any legal requirements related to implementation, bring back a community engagement plan, and lay out a pathway to move it forward. Strategy 4 is home energy score and commercial benchmarking. So I'll talk about home energy score first, and then we'll move on to benchmarking. Home energy score is a value given to a home by a certified contracted inspector that estimates the energy related use, associated costs, and cost-effective solutions to improve a home's efficiency. Here in Oregon, the Department of Energy has set up a statewide home energy scoring system that local jurisdictions can leverage. In alignment with the CAP 2.0 Action V4, the city has a website up to help educate interested community members on the home energy score and to connect them with certified inspectors. Staff presented on this item to council in early 2019, and council was broadly supportive of moving toward a mandatory program at that time that would require a home energy score at the time of sale of a home. This can be an important piece of information at the time of sale in particular, because it allows someone purchasing a home to understand the energy needs and opportunities to improve energy efficiency at a time when they're also able to access financing as they're looking into a mortgage, or that's how folks often do that. So it's an important piece of information at that moment in time for a lot of community members. I'll also mention that 3 other cities have moved forward on a home energy score. Portland has had theirs in place for some time, a mandatory program, and Milwaukee and Hillsborough have also moved forward and approved a mandatory program. So at this time, staff are planning to bring back steps to move the home energy score forward as a mandatory program in alignment with the CAP 2.0 action. We'll bring back that information in November. And the proposal that you'll see in November will include a full FTE to support not only a home energy score program, but related green building programming such as education and policy support. And next, commercial benchmarking. Commercial benchmarking programs are programs that track the energy performance of large commercial buildings. Staff are in the process of researching what this type of program could look like for Eugene. We'll bring back preliminary information in November, and no direction is needed at this time on this item. So strategy 5 proposed that the city invest funding in energy efficiency and electrification, leveraging existing incentives with EWEB and Northwest Natural to do so in a way that minimizes administrative costs. If targeted to support low-income populations, the strategy hits on every aspect of the triple bottom line. It reduces the energy burden on the low-income community members, it creates jobs, it creates more climate resiliency, and it reduces emissions. Staff are working on a report in alignment with CAP 2.0 Action B2, and we'll bring that back to you in November. That report will show that the major barrier to moving the strategy forward is funding. I worked with our affordable housing manager, Genevieve Middleton, and her team to come up with an example for you today, though, so you can start to get a sense of scale of what investment is needed in this strategy. But again, we'll have more details coming back to you soon. So just for scale for today, dedicating $200,000 towards energy efficiency within community development's existing rental rehab program could result in the preservation and improvement of about 30 units annually. So that's about $6,500 a unit. And the flexibility of this money that would come from the city could leverage additional support for even more units by providing stopgap funding in collaboration with EWEB or Northwest Naturals incentives, meaning that it could either enhance existing incentives or provide home repairs needed to access those incentives. So sometimes your home needs to be at a certain standard before you come in with energy efficiency measures. A classic example is your roof needs to be in a reasonable condition. So these estimates come from some rough math on past projects, and we definitely want you to be aware of that. And as you know, the construction market is quite volatile, particularly when we talk about pricing right now. So we'll do our best to come back with more firm numbers in November, and also to acknowledge the changing context over time. And then one more note, some of the common needs that we anticipate using those funds like this are for things like building siding, roofing, insulation, windows, more efficient heating and cooling, amongst other possibilities. So again, the takeaway here is we'll come back with more information in November. And then that means that I'll probably also carry it forward into that December work session when we talk about our climate funding. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob and then Anna to talk about the next few items. And I do just want to mention, in case anyone feels antsy about it, they're going to skip item 8 in the middle of their run, and I'll come back to that when they're finished.
Thank you, Chelsea. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Rob Innerfeld, Transportation Planning Manager in the Engineering Division of Public Works. First, I'll talk about the Transportation System Plan, if we can go to the next slide. So the Eugene 2035 Transportation System Plan, which we call the TSP, was adopted in 2017, and we will start an update to the TSP later this year. One of the reasons for doing this update is to better align the TSP with the city's climate goals and to get a better understanding of what transportation projects and programs we need to implement in order to achieve the city's fossil fuel and greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. One of our first steps in the update process will be to determine whether we can build all the projects in the TSP with the funding that we have available to us, and to determine whether there is a funding gap, especially for projects that have the potential to reduce fossil fuel use, basically to reduce driving. As part of the TSP update, we will analyze the potential greenhouse gas emissions reductions from walking, biking, and transit infrastructure projects, as well as the potential reductions from programming and regulations that encourage people to drive less. We are still trying to get an understanding of what tools there are that will enable us to do this analysis, as the modeling that we have used in the past has not been fine-grained enough to give us the information about the potential impacts of individual projects. At some point, you will hear more from us about potential regulations that would require local employers and developers to integrate transportation demand management into their work. An example of this is an employer that allows their employees to work from home part of the time. One key element of reducing fossil fuel use from transportation is transitioning to electric mobility, and I will talk about that next. Next slide, please. The city has an electric vehicle strategy that we have posted online. This strategy represents a multifaceted approach to increasing electric mobility in Eugene, including EVs, electric bikes, and other forms of electric mobility. In fiscal year 20, the city allocated $25,000 to implement the EV strategy, which allowed staff to complete the following: an EV car share pilot program, including the charging infrastructure to support the vehicles, which we're expecting to have launched later this year or early next year, and will include at least one car share vehicle at an affordable housing site in Eugene. Online shift to e-bikes education workshops, and also Rev Up EV education workshops, all of which were very well attended and are available to watch online, and also Spanish language e-bike education content. Some of the other key things we have been working on to promote electric mobility include developing comprehensive online resources for people interested in EVs and e-bikes, supporting Lane Transit District's efforts to transition its fleet to electric buses, preparing for potential state and federal grant funding for EV charging infrastructure, working with eWeb to investigate the potential to install EV charging in the right-of-way, including near multifamily housing that does not have chargers for its residents. And lastly, preparing for a shared e-scooter pilot program launch next spring. The City of Eugene has limited funding to support implementation of our electric vehicle work, and we'll provide more information about that at the work session in December. On my team, I have two staff who have spent a considerable amount of time on our electric mobility work, Logan Tellis and Karen Mason. And Logan is here with us today in case there's EV questions that come up during your discussion. I think that now we'll hand it over to Anna.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Chelsea. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Anna Reed, and I'm an analyst in the city's waste prevention program. I'm going to discuss two strategies that fall into the category of fugitive emissions. In general, fugitive emissions are gases that leak into the environment from systems where the gases are meant to remain trapped or could be captured for additional uses. Two examples are refrigerant loss from appliances and methane release from the disposal of organic waste. So strategy number 9 is to reduce refrigerant loss. And as Chelsea mentioned earlier, we will come back to strategy 8 in a little bit. Refrigerant gases are used in appliances such as air conditioners, refrigerators, and commercial refrigeration systems, and approximately 90% of refrigerant loss occurs during disposal. The city will be leading a project and partnering with Good Company in 2022, collaborating with businesses to better understand where leakage is happening and explore reduction strategies that work for the community. We will provide further updates after that report is completed in 2022, so no action is necessary at this time. Slide. Thanks. Another emission reduction strategy is to capture biogas from various organic waste streams and utilize it as an alternative fuel source. Short Mountain Landfill already captures biogas from organic waste disposal, and Lane County is currently studying the feasibility for implementing an anaerobic digester facility at the landfill as well. Our recommendation is to wait for that study to be completed and then have staff report back on next steps. And now I'm going to turn it back to Chelsea to discuss some additional strategies. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rob and Anna. I'll wrap up with a few more strategies that don't fall neatly into any of our buckets, but that have more of an overarching impact. So strategy 8 is to lobby for state and federal action. Staff across the organization participate on this item to further the CRO goals. I'll give a few examples here, and I'll note that this only scratches the surface. Many staff members find ways to incorporate our climate goals into their work at the state and federal level. So first, I want to remind you that you all have a big role in this. The climate recovery, in that you create the legislative priorities for the city. So we have both the climate recovery and environmental and natural resources sections in our legislative priorities. And those are linked in the slides, as well as materials from a presentation that Ethan Nelson gave to you, our intergovernmental relations manager, on the 2021 legislative session. I'll also note that City Council passed a resolution supporting carbon pricing for the state of Oregon in 2015. All of these items help guide staff as we advocate for more climate action at different levels of government. So my second example is recognizing the long list of unfunded needs. City staff remains committed to investing time and energy in understanding the opportunities for federal funding and applying for grants that align with council priorities, including climate. And many federal programs are now requiring greater inclusion of climate equity aspects as part of the programming. Examples include increased federal funding for active transportation and transit, reauthorization of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, new resiliency funding for FEMA, and increased housing and shelter support for HUD. Staff will continue to keep council and the Intergovernmental Relations Committee updated as we secure funding for council priorities. Third, Mayor Vinnis holds several national leadership positions related to climate action. She's a Climate Mayor Steering Committee member and was recently appointed as a member of the EPA's Local Government Advisory Committee. Mayor Vinnis not only elevates Eugene's needs, but the needs of local governments in general. It's truly a way Eugene shines as a national leader on climate, and we're very thankful for her commitment and leadership. And last, I'll mention that staff across the organization participate in state level processes related to climate, especially recently with the passage of the governor's executive order. For example, Rob Innerfeld, who you just heard from, has served as the city's lead representative on DLCV's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking Committee. And Michael Wist, our Waste Prevention Manager, participated in DQ's Recycling Steering Committee over the past few years. Staff aren't looking for any direction today on this item. You'll provide direction to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee with your policy decisions on an ongoing basis, which guides this work throughout the year. Next, strategy 11 is carbon offsets. So the purchase of carbon offsets here is for community-wide emissions, so different than what I talked about before, which was for our operational emissions. This is always an option, but we're not currently pursuing it, and we would need council direction to advance the strategy any further. And last, strategy 12 is our community innovation fund idea. So the idea behind this fund is to support community climate initiatives for climate mitigation and resiliency with small grants. The city revamped the criteria for the community and neighborhood matching grant program to include climate work in 2019. And the community panel that oversees this work now includes a sustainability commissioner seat. I've linked the program in the slides here, and outreach for this program is ongoing. Funding for FY22 is now open, so please help us spread the word. We look forward to seeing what ideas come from our community in the next year. I'll just do a couple more slides to help us wrap up. So for clarity, I wanted to go back to this tile slide, but with a new color scheme to make sure we're all on the same page about what staff need direction on, where you can expect staff to come back with more information, and what we do not plan to bring back in the near future. So the green tiles, strategies 4 through 10, and also strategy 12, you can expect more on soon. We're moving those forward. So more specifically, you can expect more robust reports with next steps for tiles 4 and 5 in November. Tile 6, the TSP work will come back to you in 2022 as part of the full TSP update. Tile 7 will be wrapped into our conversation on funding for climate work, tentatively planned for December. And staff will continue to work on Tile 8 with our intergovernmental relations team and many other actors across the organization. And we'll keep you updated on 9 and 10 as reports are finalized. And the framework for strategy 12 is complete. We just need to continue to do outreach. The yellow tiles were paused when we started the Northwest Natural Franchise and Climate Agreement negotiations, so strategies 1 through 3. We need direction from you to pick these back up and start researching next steps. Last, staff continue to monitor strategy 11, but we do not plan to bring back new information without further direction. So this is essentially the same information, just in one more format to try and make the timeline and expectations really clear. So again, that first column, you can see the strategies that are paused or that are long-term strategies are numbers 1, 2, 3, and 11. We need direction to move forward on those. Coming back in November, our strategies 4 and 5, coming back in December. We anticipate our strategies 4, 5, and 7 coming back in 2022, strategies 6, 9, and 10, and last ongoing are strategies 8 and 12. Thanks for listening. That was a lot of information and looking forward to the discussion. I'll hand it over to you, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Chelsea and Rob and Anna. That was a lot of information, and it's compelling information. I think the initial slides are a little bit depressing that we've actually lost ground since 2017. So we're going a little bit in the wrong direction. But my optimistic takeaway is all the ways in which you have moved forward and the opportunities that are before us to really make a lot of progress in the coming months. So very much appreciate the report. And Greg, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I did, Mayor.
Take it away.
As far as these strategies are concerned, are there any ones that we have an opportunity to accelerate so that we can move faster to our goals? And what kind of means do you need to accelerate those particular strategies? The second thing is, as far as home energy scores and other building scores, are we looking at developing an app that people can use to, make that process a lot easier for them, and possibly that app could transmit information back into the city to give us more accurate readings about what's happening in buildings?
Thanks for those questions, Councilor Evans. So to your second question, we aren't looking at developing an app at this time. If that's something you want us to look into, we can see what's available there. To the first question, what do we need to move faster, do more quickly? I think there are different ways that you can move this work forward. Some of it requires decisions, some of it requires funding, and I tried to articulate that in your packet as clearly as I could. So I think, for example, when we talked about strategy 5, the way to move that forward faster is to put more dollars there. But other strategies, I think, require that policy decision to really get things moving forward. And then we talk about the resources needed to move them forward. So I can think more about getting more specific on that for you, but I hope that points you in the direction you're hoping.
Yeah, that helps me some. I'm just thinking about some kind of grid, if you would, would help us to make those policy changes or decisions that we need to make, and then how much more are we going to have to invest in order to make those changes happen?
Yeah, we can do that. I think one of the challenges I just want to flag here is if we just take our building stock, for example, if we choose to do kind of decarbonization through investment alone, there's questions about how much comes from the city, how much comes from state, how much comes from federal, and so on. So we'll strive to provide you context, scalability, and all of that. But I hear you in wanting the grid.
Okay, Randy, and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, everybody, for the presentation. And I think that this is some good work. I appreciate the way you approach this. I also want to thank our Sustainability Commission. I have some statements and some questions. First of all, and this is probably better saved for our discussion with EWEB, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. Do we have any insight into what the impact of hydroelectric generation will be due to some of our recent federal court decisions reducing hydro output capacity to preserve endangered species?
I would rather wait and have EWEB respond to that. I think they'll have the best information.
Okay, I figured that's what you would say. And just to throw this out here, also for EWEB, how is the drought impacting hydroelectric output? And back to you, Chelsea, though, where does the EWEB electrification study fit in with all of this?
Yeah, it's a really important study. if you think about moving towards electric vehicles or to electrifying our building stock, we need to know that we have the electricity, first of all, available, and second of all, that it will be clean electricity, because that's imperative to accomplishing our climate goals. So it's really important. And I think I'll stop there unless you have more specific questions.
Well, I do have some, well, this is still kind of a general question. You know, as we move forward and start having discussions about this and where to go from here, what other data do you think we need in order to have an honest discussion and conversation about the directions we're being asked to consider?
That's a very big question there. So I think within each strategy, I think, as I mentioned, the data is from 2019. So if you are interested in any particular strategy, we would go back and see what new data is there. I think we always strive to provide data around the triple bottom line. So you're thinking about economic impact both to the city and to the community. We want to think about equity impacts and environmental impacts. So I think, again, any strategy you point us to, we'll dig back into the data and see if there's anything new there, as well as hearing from our community, and bring that information back to you.
Okay. Part of the problem is I don't even know what to ask in some cases, but I just want to make sure we're getting all the data we can so we make, you know, really well thought through and informed decisions. Also, with regard to offsets, this is more of a statement. I hope there is potential for us to create our own localized offset programs. I would rather be spending money that improves our situation rather than, you know, offshoring it somewhere. So that's something that I hope we have a chance to talk more about. And then also the next thing is the CAP 2.0 plan uses the urban growth boundary numbers. But if we're talking about city regulation, we can only apply that to the city itself, correct?
That's my understanding in most cases. If it's helpful, I can talk more about why we use the UGB. Just let me know.
Well, it might be also helpful to see how the consultant projected our city limit growth within the UGB each year, just so we understand how that all pertains back to this point. And then finally, the last thing I have is it seems like one of our strategies that's not included in this is how do we adjust our societal appetite for energy consumption? I mean, that seems to be a piece. I mean, I'm probably as bad as anyone. It's always just easier to more grow and use more power. It just seems like there should be some level of personal awareness that we try to have as a strategy for public education of things we can do to just reduce our use, not just be more efficient, but just reduce use. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. This is another one where I'll point back to EWEB. They do a great job in encouraging conservation. That's part of their plan and kind of managing our energy moving forward. So that'd be another great one to bring up next week with them. They can talk about the specifics, but I'll also say we continue to think about kind of behavior that you're talking about in a number of fronts in our climate work. And part of our strategy right now is education. We use the SHIFT campaign to try and get information out about how you can reduce your use. But it's a cultural shift, as you mentioned. So I think there's a lot of avenues to think about there.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. That's all for now.
I'm just going to jump in really quick before we move on to mention that the electrification study update is the first topic on the agenda next week in our joint meeting. So a lot of these questions will make a lot of sense then. So good to vet them now because it lets us preload it for EWEB as well.
That's why I was bringing them up more than expecting an answer today. I'm sure EWEB is watching, and you know, the more we can have this up front, I think it'll just help prime the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Chelsea, and all the others who were part of it here today. My first question, I think, is for Sarah there to take off on the previous. My understanding is that the EWEB work was done something like almost a year ago. perhaps I'm wrong about that, and they had further refining to do. Will we receive that report in its entirety? And if you can characterize, why has it taken so much longer than expected?
Well, I think I'm not sure on the exact timing, but they've actually done 2 phases of their report. So the one that is the most recent is phase 2, and I believe they just presented that to their board in August. I'm not sure if it's an attachment or not to your AIS. If it's not, I can definitely email that out to you.
And that was going to be the second part of that question. Will we get the complete report on, how much electricity are we talking about when we talk about some of the questions that all of us, I'm sure, have now and will have as we go on about complete electrification? That the capacity and cost will be included in that report?
Well, somewhat, and again, better questions for Frank, but as I've read the report, what they were mostly looking at is what is the electrification need and cost based on what they project to be the market. They were mostly looking at the market shift. So market conditions that would shift, and could they manage that capacity, and what is that capacity? It's not a report that specifically says if you regulate all buildings to be electric at this time, this is what it's going to be. So in the bucket of what other data might we need, that may be one of those that they may have that information. And I've asked Frank about that, but I don't know if it's ready to go.
Is there information about relative cost versus demand and demand capacity?
Yeah, there is some of that information in there.
And you have it already? When will we have this report?
I can send you a link to it. I
Awesome.
went onto their board page and found it.
Awesome. I would love that very much. Secondly, Chelsea, thank you again for the report. The yellow boxes, maybe they were a different color than yellow. They looked yellow to me. On this last slide where you talked about the cooperative effort with Northwest Natural. In our absence, what would be the impact on all of those mitigation, on all that mitigation work, if we had an absence of an agreement at all with Northwest Natural on an ongoing basis?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking. Sarah, do you?
It seemed to me like those 3 yellow boxes with the mitigation efforts seemed cooperative with Northwest Natural. If we couldn't come to agreement and then we were no longer cooperating, what would be the impact in those boxes?
So I think I'm not 100% sure I'm understanding, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I think we paused those 3 strategies and we took the concepts forward. So for example, in the negotiations with Northwest Natural, we talked about offsets, and we talked of, which is like, I'm sorry, the sun is getting me, offsets similar to, which is kind of like strategy 1, the smart energy program. We didn't talk about specifically that program. That's a concept in that negotiation. So I just want to be clear that those didn't like move from this directly like verbatim into those negotiations. They're topics that we talked about.
Let me try and refine my question, make it easier and better. What would be the impact on your modeling and your planning if we could not come to agreement with Northwest Natural and those efforts were not able to move forward in a cooperative way?
I think I can answer this one, Chelsea. So right now, what we're working on with Northwest Natural is this more of a together mode of how do we reach the climate goals. And this 844 agreement that we're working on right now is, until that final project list is developed, we won't know what that carbon reduction number is. But as soon as we do, we'll have that number. And that's what I think you're asking is, if that goes away, what is the impact on the modeling?
Correct.
And I think if that goes away, then the conversation about regulating gas in another way comes forward, and we could model that. We could do a reasonable projection of that, but I couldn't tell you what that is until I know what that project list really finishes up looking like.
don't we lose some of our capacity in that process if that agreement were to go away? Don't we lose some of our capacity to regulate without a cooperative agreement?
I'm struggling to understand the question too. So I'm sorry. I'm not usually.
Sure. Yeah. All I'm trying to get at is, are we better off working together with them, or are we better off just not coming to agreement and saying, sorry, we're going to regulate as we see fit?
I think that it depends on what better off means. So if you want to look at a specific climate, carbon.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get.
Yeah, I'm not sure based on when we would implement it and what would be legal for us to do. I can tell you that I think, as I've always said, we're balancing multiple things in this process to ensure that we are meeting climate goals and trying to serve the community in ways that they want to be served. So I think there's a number of things happening here. So if the agreement goes away and we just move into a regulatory mode, it's possible we could advance those carbon reductions faster, depending on what those regulations were, but you'd be doing it at a cost of the other goals that we're working together on. So it's hard to know what that number is.
Right. So this is my larger point, is that knowing whether it's wiser to work together or not is an important question to answer. And to me, it seems like working together is wiser, at least from the standpoint of the information I have right now. It seems like to not work together would be to create enormous expense to everybody who lives here, and to frankly do less work to protect the environment. So I'm trying to draw that out in questions about the specifics as best I can, but I'm not, that's just my sense of this. So I'm looking for the details that you have that I may not have that can help answer that question for me. Are we wiser to continue to move forward together than to do something that would result in a non-agreement? I'd like to know your opinion, sir.
Well, I think, as I have said from the very beginning, as part of the early council direction on this franchise, we were looking for a way to meet our climate goals together. And I think working together towards that is definitely a wise way to go. But that is based on a larger perspective than just specifically carbon reduction. We're trying to do multiple things in this agreement. And if you're just, it's so hard to answer your question, Councilor Clark, because if you're just looking for carbon reduction and that's all you care about, that's the number one only thing, then we would need to tell you, I can't tell you right now exactly how much carbon reduction we would get going purely regulatory and not having a together agreement, because we don't actually know the carbon reduction we're getting on the together agreement yet. So I feel like you're asking me to be a very specific technical answer to something. I don't have the specific technical information.
Well, and I appreciate your answer, because it illustrates the larger point, is that we don't have enough information at this time prior to EWEB's agreement to make any significant decisions, or excuse me, prior to EWEB's information presentation next time. I don't think we have anywhere near the kind of information we need to make significant decisions. So I just wanted to draw that out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Matt and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chelsea. I'd like to go to slide 11 in the presentation, please.
I'm sorry, I'm working on that.
Mayor, may I get 12 seconds back on my time, please? Wait. Thanks. Well, maybe it wasn't, yeah, this will work. Chelsea, thank you so much. This slide illustrates that 32% of local building energy contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And you mentioned that's, quote, mostly natural gas. My question is, roughly, what's the breakdown between clean energy, electricity, and so-called natural gas? Number one. And number two, in that natural gas bucket, then what would be the breakdown between residential and commercial greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I can pull up our inventory and give you specific numbers. I'm worried about being a little bit off and making some folks very mad who are watching. So I'll give rough numbers right now. So I think emissions for natural gas within the 2030 projections, which we show here, we projected they'd be about 320,000 metric tons. And I'm trying to remember I think we're around 270,000 metric tons in our 2017 work. And then similarly for electricity, I don't remember the 2030 projection, but I think we're around 15,000. I can pull the numbers up like in 2 minutes, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'd love a follow-up, please, because my back of the napkin math illustrates that of that 32% of building energy that contributes to greenhouse gas, it's 90% gas and roughly 10% electricity. And then in that gas bucket, 1/3 would be residential and 2/3 would be commercial. Is that an accurate assessment?
I'm looking at our inventory right now on my side. So updated information for our electricity emissions in 2019 was about a little over 14,000 metric tons for residential and 21,000 metric tons for commercial and industrial. So total about 35,000 metric tons. On the natural gas side, we had 86,000 for residential and about 181,000 for commercial and industrial. So roughly what you just said, accurate.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. I would like to now go to the Smart Energy Program potential direction. And I'm interested in exploring steps to support or implement a mandatory smart energy program. But I'd like to talk, if we could share that slide with us and or talk about what that means for ratepayers, for users of Northwest natural gas, and how that might affect renters who have no choice when they rent a house and are forced to sign up with a gas company.
All right. So Smart Energy Program, again, is a program already offered by Northwest Natural on a voluntary basis. And this strategy would be for us to explore what it would take to move to either a mandatory program or an auto enrollment program where folks could opt out. So I think this is when we paused, so we don't know all the steps to implementation. And if we unpause it, we would come back with more information. But essentially the program as it exists now, Northwest Natural has it set up where you can either choose to offset the emissions that you actually emit, or you can sign up for a flat rate fee, both of your residential or commercial. I believe off the top of my head, it's $5 a month for residential if you opt for the flat rate fee, which should give you a sense of kind of the average amount. And then to your second question around renters, I think that's kind of a conversation that we could walk through. Why or why not would we include renters in that? I think we do know that there's a social cost to carbon. And so I think the argument for that would be to consider, like, regardless of whether you're a renter or not, should that should you be included in paying for that kind of the offset here? I think there are different arguments you could look at, and we could bring those back if you direct us to look into the strategy.
Okay. Did I hear you right? 2% of Northwest natural, or of the only 2% of, help me wrap my head around the percentage of renewable hydrogen that is currently explored at a local level. I think I heard you say 2% right now.
Yeah, so according to Northwest Natural, about 2% of their contracts right now are for renewable natural gas, and that's to be accurate, I believe that's throughout their system. So that includes our local area, but kind of throughout their system.
How adequate is that?
Can you tell me more what you mean by adequate?
I'll move on to another question because my time is coming to a close. I'm excited to hear you reference the governor's executive order 20-04 that empowers agencies, including but not limited to Oregon Global Warming Condition, Oregon Department of Forestry, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, ODFW, Department of Agriculture, the Public Utilities Commission, Business Oregon, Environmental Justice Task Force, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, the EQC, the Environmental Quality Commission, to all lean in to the full extent of their respective authorities to reduce emissions. And it would be in this municipalities and our community's interest to do so as well. I fully support exploring strict so-called natural gas regulation. Thank you so much, Chelsea.
Thank you, Alan, and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things that Mike, the eWeb study, to my understanding, the year ago one was kind of around, could we do it and what would it look like? And then the new study is what does it cost and how would we more specifically do it? And that's the August study that they came back to the board with. So we'll hear more about that. I want to touch on a couple of things on the 12 additional actions. On number 8, the lobbying for state and federal action. You know, we accounted for 250,000 of our roughly a quarter of our million ton goal to come from that. But since we did that calculation, there have been a slew of a whole bunch of new things that have occurred in that realm, including the climate protection program that the Governor Brown put into place, which is going to happen start in January 2022, which has natural gas and gasoline, diesel emissions reduced by 80% from 2019 levels by 2050. So that's a huge lift. And the clean fuels program on the carbon intensity of fuels, the standard is doubled. And then we've got the Biden administration pushing EVs with charging and percent of sales, and the fact that cost parity is coming really quickly with EVs, and the climate change infrastructure bill is going to have a lot of dollars on it. The CAFE standards are going back to where they were from the dismal performance by the Trump administration to eliminate them almost. A lot of energy efficiency dollars, literally billions of dollars going into this. And I think that 250,000 part is really being underestimated. And I think we need to keep into consideration that, and the takeaway from that is we're not in this alone. We only have levers that we can pull on a local level. A lot of them, most of them are pulled at the federal and the state level. And that action is happening now, which it wasn't 2 years ago, and it's moving forward, and it actually reduces what we need to do. Not to say that we need to do less, but it helps a whole lot to be able to get some of those things done through the federal and state action. On the natural gas regulation, 40,000 metric tons, 12,000 from residential, that's 1% of our goal. So that's not a significant, it's kind of like we spend 90% of our time on that, but it's really a small portion of it. But really the thing about that particular issue is that 87% of our future emissions in the natural gas arena come from existing homes and businesses, and 13% comes from new. So we're kind of missing the boat in terms of focusing on the existing, which we need to do, but that's a very daunting very daunting thing to do. Just for instance, the 30,000, I'll need another round, Mayor, but the 30,000 customers that are natural gas customers that do heating at $4,000 to $8,000 a piece to retrofit them, that's $100 to $200 million just for Eugene. 50 to 60% of those people are low income. And so that just presents a whole slew of equity issues and financing issues and things like that to be able to do that, which we'll need to explore. I'll need another round, Mayor.
Yep, I've got you for another round. Jennifer and then Claire.
Thanks, Mayor. So thank you so much, Chelsea and Rob and Anna. This was an excellent report, and you guys always do a good job, but I really appreciate this. It feels like a really great update and warm up for those meetings, and I'm very much looking forward to in November and December. So I appreciate getting this information now so that I'm ready to go then. I will, so I don't forget, I will agree with Mike that I think if we could do things with our partners instead of at them, that would be fantastic. But it takes all parties to do something together. And that's not really where we are right now. So I appreciate staff giving us ideas and options for things that we can do should that partnership not work out in the end. I had a question, really good questions have already been asked, so I don't have too many. I have a question on the EV stuff. You were talking about looking into doing chargers in right-of-ways for folks who live in apartment complexes and or don't have access to chargers. But I'm wondering, are we doing or are we planning to do any work of working with landlords to see if they can have ways to provide charging in apartment complexes? I mean, people that have homes obviously can create their own situations, right? But if you're in an apartment complex, you have an EV, like where are you going to charge this thing is a huge problem.
Sure. Logan, do you want to answer that as to whether that's part of what we're doing at all? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So eWeb is a really fantastic partner in electrification work. And by the way, I'm Logan Tellis. I'm a transportation planner. I work on implementation of our electric vehicle strategy. eWeb has a really fantastic rebate available for multifamily housing complexes. You can get $1,500 back if you purchase a charging station and install it for your tenants. That's true for multifamily housing. That's also true for commercial properties. So that's something that we definitely have a desire to advertise more and actually proactively reach out to multifamily housing property management companies and developers alike, because we know that a lot of these types of complexes have quote unquote EV ready spaces where they have some of their parking spaces with the electrical connection out to support a charging station because of state building regulations. But oftentimes they don't move forward with fully installing it. So we think that targeting those types of properties would be a good jump off point for that targeted marketing of that rebate program.
Oh, that's excellent. So you're already well ahead of me. I think that's great. Thank you, Logan. Let's see. The other thing I really also appreciated, you're talking about the energy efficiency. I also think that that's a really important component to all this. And while I can see that it's very expensive, I think it, like you said, I think it hits all of those important priorities that we have in one project. So I'm really looking forward to getting some really good information about how we could move that forward back. And that is coming, that one's coming back in November or December?
Both. So we'll provide more detailed information in November to hopefully tee you up well for the December conversation.
Okay. Okay, excellent. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire, and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chelsea, and the rest of the staff for this great update and helpful information. I just had a few comments and questions. So on page 19 of our AIS strategy number 4, the home energy score commercial benchmarking programs, I was intrigued in the additional notes and considerations about a recommendation for a larger green building framework and supporting this with 0.5 FTE. Could you speak a little bit more about that and what that would allow us to do that we're not able to do now?
Absolutely. So right now, the city doesn't have a green building program in place. But we have lots of needs around this topic. Some examples that come up frequently are when a developer comes in to scope out a project. It would be great to have someone who could really educate them on the trade-offs between different fuel sources, let them know about these EV strategies, and make sure they're kind of getting that comprehensive education package. Another example is there's lots of work going on at the state level around buildings and the topics we've mentioned today. And so to have someone to really be on point for that, rather than having that kind of be delegated to my team who's pretty maxed out, or others, would be really helpful. So I think in addition, and it would just be well situated with the Home Energy Score program to have a full FTE to do that package of work.
So city manager, thank you, Chelsea. City manager, would we need to, as a council, say we wanted to make the Home Energy Score a mandatory program, or give you some other direction in order to kind of support you in moving towards establishing that FTE?
Yeah, I feel, what Chelsea said is I feel like there's already been sort of strong support for doing that program. So it's just a matter of us funding it and getting, staffing to do it. So yeah, we'll need to address that either through the budget process or supplemental budget process. And as you know, it's, as I said on Monday night, even at a time that we're looking at big reductions, we also know there's areas we need to be investing. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenging year, but we've done it for the last couple of years where we've continued to make investments. And this is an area where we'll be evaluating and making a recommendation to you.
Okay, great. So I'll encourage myself and my fellow counselors who are interested in that to keep an eye on that and check in on that as we get those other updates and move towards a budget. On the carbon offsets, on that smart energy offset item, I was curious why the large range between 32,000 metric tons and 320,000 metric tons were estimated for if that project was mandatory or opt-in or opt-out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was trying to illustrate there's different options within that strategy. So we could choose to make it mandatory for everyone, commercial, residential, industrial, or we could just choose one of those sectors, or we could think about, I'm not sure how, but we could think about impacts on low income or renters or so on. So there's flexibility there, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Gotcha. That's very helpful. Thank you. And I just wanted to note, even though we're not pursuing a strategy of purchasing carbon offsets for the greater community, I did want to just advertise that the City of Eugene Airport has partnered with an organization so that if you fly in and out of the airport, you can go to the Eugene Airport website and link in and purchase your own carbon offsets for your own flight, which I think is a great thing for us to be encouraging. And just lastly, I want to say I'm really looking forward to the many updates and next pieces of this conversation, but especially the update on the transportation system plan that we're anticipating for next year. Part of this new landscape that Chelsea and other staff have referenced, and Councilor Zlinka, is a much stronger embrace of electrification of our transportation system at the federal level. And we should be prepared to receive funding and implement projects in these next couple of years that will move us forward on our CRO goals around transportation. And that's really exciting and a really stark change in the landscape of the past. And lastly, I just wanted to ask on that EV charging and the eWeb rebate program, does staff need any additional direction from council in order to do that outreach to property managers that was mentioned?
I'll jump in on this. I don't believe so. We have gotten help from PDD on identifying properties that may have those EV ready parking spaces. So I think we're ready to go on that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Emily, and then we'll go into second rounds.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chelsea, and to your whole team. Thank you to the whole staff. I am also looking forward to the TSP, although it happened right at the beginning of my first term. It was a little overwhelming that time. But the transportation is the bucket that's filled up the most. So all of the strategies are great, but I think we make the most difference there. And because transportation is so big, it's time to really promote and support the electric vehicles with stations. If there's any incentives we could give them, and I thought the federal tax credit for the buying an electric vehicle, $10,000, talking my language. So I think that we need to educate people that, you know, electric vehicles are not out of reach since they're not so cutting edge anymore. And like my colleagues, I think the home energy score is really essential. And it's a way where everybody gets to participate. You know, everybody could have a home energy score and get ideas to how to help this. I know some people are very frustrated about how to participate. I think we should require it when a building is sold. And I'm not sure, I'd like a little more oomph to the renting situation because the renters are at a disadvantage. And when they rent a place to live, shouldn't be, you know, forced to hurt the environment too. And number 12 is really important to me. We talk often about how creative and innovative Eugene is and how it's going to take all of us. And all of us isn't just us and staff, it's everybody who lives here. So more education, more outreach. I think the neighborhood grants is great, but how else do we get individuals thinking, not necessarily by going to their neighborhood group, but you know, we've all been inside a lot. There's a lot of time for thinking, and I bet some people have some great ideas. So how can we find them? Northwest gas offsets, I don't really like offsets. I think they're regressive. They certainly give everybody an impetus to change to electric or use less gas. And then lastly, regulating natural gas and the infrastructure. You know, the advocates are really ready for that. I'm ready to say we need to do it. I know we want more information from EWEB and natural gas, but I do think we could give direction to staff. We want to do this, we could get started on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 4 counselors wanting a second round, but I'm just going to jump in for 2 seconds. Just following up on the conversation with EV charging in housing, we as a community invest in affordable housing. We use federal dollars to do that. We have some of our own affordable housing trust fund money to do that. Does HUD, I mean, is there a connection here with electrification? New housing projects being electrified? Does HUD have any regulations around that or recommendations around that? Or is that something we could look into? And also the EV charging in those new projects as they go in, it feels like would be an important opportunity.
We can follow up and get back to you on that. But Logan, do you just want to briefly speak to the new legislation that is going to require more EV, at least the electricity provisions for all multifamily and commercial?
Sure. So per House Bill 2180, there's going to be a building code change that goes into place on July 1st of 2022. And under these new building code regulations, new commercial construction, as well as multifamily housing residential with 5 or more units are going to be required to equip 20% of their parking spaces with EV ready infrastructure. So that is, once again, leading out electrical to the parking space. They're not required to actually install the charging station itself, but that is an improvement above the amount of EV ready spaces they need to install currently. The legislation also specifically points out that cities have the ability to require above 20% if they choose to do so. So that's something that the city of Eugene could consider doing in the future. That's a whole conversation that would need to be had. Yeah, that's an exciting change that's going to be taking place in 2022.
And then regarding the HUD subsidized affordable housing, we can look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, that would be great to know. Thank you very much. So let's go into second rounds. I have Mike, then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two predominant lines of question. First for Rob. One of the things that I asked and moved to be included in the TSP was autonomous vehicles and infrastructure needs, I think. And I was wondering if you might update on that, because that's a significant alteration in the amount of electricity used.
That's something we'll wrap into the TSP update. We did hire the University of Oregon to do some work for us on that. To be honest, I think just the state of the art on autonomous vehicles is really pushed back quite a bit in terms of what you might have asked experts a couple of years ago, for probably a lot of, not enough time to talk about right now. And there's also varying sort of opinions about whether AVs would reduce energy use or increase, even if they're all electrified, because there could be a lot more vehicle miles traveled with autonomous vehicles, and there could be some unintended consequences. So part of the work that the university did was to make recommendations to us for how we can sort of ensure that when we have AVs in Eugene, that it's in a way that benefits our community. So we'll wrap that into the TSP update. We also need to do a better job of just putting the information online from the work that the U of O did for us. We'll get that put up online and make sure you're aware of that once it's posted.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate that. And I get your point that a rapid acceleration of demand on electricity creates a whole other series of questions about where that electricity and how that electricity is generated. So electric vehicles, replacing those, there's real deep questions there.
Just to be clear, I wasn't saying that's a lot more electricity is a problem. I was just saying that there could be a lot more driving with AVs.
I see.
Even though that could offset the fact that they're a lot more efficient.
Even with fewer vehicles on the road? Would it, as vehicle miles?
Maybe. I mean, that definitely there could be more driving with autonomous vehicles. But again, I think that's really a discussion for another day.
I agree with you. Chelsea, help me with this. I'm not sure how to ask the questions. So in preparation for some of our future discussions with EWIP and so forth, will you remind me what's the loss? The efficiency loss. I don't even know how to ask this question right. When you use natural gas to create electricity, the thermal loss is 30-some%. Can you help me? Remind me, when one uses natural gas to create electricity, as opposed to burning natural gas directly, what's the loss?
I understand your question. I'm going to have to follow up with that one. I'm not sure at the top of
my recollection is it's something in the 30% range. Is that close?
I'm going to have to follow up. I'm sorry.
You don't have any idea?
I don't have that at the tip of my fingertips. No.
I see. Okay. My sense is that when we go to I'm trying to get at how EWEB's, in anticipation of speaking with EWEB, how much of their electricity is produced by burning natural gas. Can you answer that? What percentage it is today?
I cannot. What I can tell you is on their website, they say their electricity is currently about 80% carbon free and 90% from renewable sources. That's the information I have right now, but they have a broader breakdown on their website. Yeah.
Okay. And in that process, that's done differently based on the size of the demand. So in peak demand moments where they don't have any choices, maybe Alan and I could sit and talk about this. I bet he knows what the increase in fossil gas burning is necessary to meet massive demand for electricity. Can you comment on that at all with any relative kind of information?
I think I'd rather weight and direct that towards EWEB next week. Sarah, looks like you want to jump in.
Well, I was just going to say that based on their electrification study, EWEB's 1% natural gas.
And that's at peak time or on average, or?
It's just in their portfolio. So when you look at the mix of their portfolio, 1% of it is natural gas.
And if they doubled the amount of electricity they had to put out, it would be, did they say that in this report?
I'd have to literally stop listening to everything and read the report on those 3 pages. So I think this is stuff we can be prepared to answer next week.
Yeah, and I bring it up just because of the relevance of the idea that, yes, we want to be doing as much as we can in the realm that Chelsea's working on, but I want to avoid us acting disproportionately and creating a worse outcome unintentionally. So thank you.
Okay, Alan, and then we have Matt and Greg. So I'm hoping we can make these discreet so everyone has a chance to get in there. Ask questions.
Sure. Mike, that's not quite the right question. The right question is how much of the gas heating system contributes to the heating of our community? And because a lot of people have dual fuel systems, I don't know the number for Eugene, but in the state, 93% of the peak heating loads on really cold days comes from gas. To replace that and shift it all to electric is a big deal. So that's part of the conundrum over time. And most of that, again, is in the existing category, which is 87% of the natural gas emissions. I really, just a couple more points on number 3. The MWMC project that's being built right now is going to go online later this year. Is one of the largest biogas to transportation fuel projects in the state, and right here in River City. And it's actually has a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and it's cost effective to do for MWMC. On number 4, a home energy score. Portland, Milwaukee, Hillsborough have already done it. I think there's 6 or so other communities that are looking at it. I'm eager to move forward on this. So I'm an eager yes to move forward, and no one go back that to November. On number 6, the transportation system plan. It's great to hear finally that we're moving forward with that and integrating the CRO into the TSP. I think it was my motion 4 or 5 years ago to do that, along with the CIP, and we're slowly but surely getting sort of there. So I'm eager to, yes, to incorporate that into the TSP, the CRO into the TSP. On number 7, I think EVs are going to be huge, and they're taking off. By the way, there's a $7,500 incentive at the state level and $7,500 at the federal level, depending on your income, to move forward. And right now, with those incentives, a lot of EVs are cheaper to operate over their life than a gas-powered vehicle. And in about 2 or 3 years, the upfront cost is going to be about the same. So EVs is going to take off. Shameless plug, there's a Oregon Department of Energy report that just came out on the 15th called the Biennial Zero Emission Vehicle Report, or the BIZEV, and it handles all those questions that everybody asked is in that report. I commend it to you and look at it. And because transportation is 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and we're not doing crap about it, we're kind of missing the boat there. We prioritize our efforts in this area. EVs is going to be a huge part of our greenhouse gas emission reductions, and it has to be. And that conduit and that 20% EV ready, that just means that the conduit goes there. It doesn't mean that there's anything else that's there. And then finally, offsets. I struggle with people's lack of understanding about how offsets work and how they actually work. And interesting that electricity, we've been doing that with conservation for decades and not with a problem at all by buying other people's conservation.
Okay, thank you. Matt and then Greg.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just it's more of a process question. Are we taking a motion and adopting these suggestions, or are we giving a head nod? Are we giving a thumbs up? Because I'm just looking for some clarification around the best ways to close the gap in regards to number 2, especially the regulatory suggestions in the regulate natural gas table. City Council needs policy direction, to explore natural gas regulation in more detail. And that's pretty vague, pretty nebulous, but I think you know where I stand on advancing strict guardrails and regulation. And I just want to know what you need from us today.
Yeah, so I could put up this slide again, but basically those three around natural gas are paused until we hear from you that you want us to unpause them. So I'd ask maybe Sarah to weigh in on what that looks like.
Yeah, I think the intent was, you know, work with Northwest Natural and the direction from this council is to work with Northwest Natural to find an agreement that meets your climate goals. And you've held off on doing additional work on these three until we complete that work. So if the majority of the council says, you know, maybe we don't want to do that, we just want to regulate it, I would feel like we would need more specific direction. Otherwise, we would revisit this topic at some point after we were complete with the 844 and working on franchise.
I appreciate that. I mean, if the agreement agreed to no new fossil fuel hookups and implemented a significant fee or tax on the fossil fuel industry, who at the height of our franchise agreement actively attempted to lure electric customers away from electric to switch to natural gas, and if there was an equitable transition away from fossil fuels for all of our residents in the municipality, then I'd support it. But at this juncture, please put me in the camp of supporting.
You just muted yourself, Matt. Sorry, we missed that last.
We didn't. We don't know what camp you went to.
Of strict, robust regulation.
Okay, Greg, final comment.
Yeah, this will be real quick, Mayor. And I think Rob Interfeld can answer this question. Hopefully he can answer the question because he's been tracking these meetings. So I'm representing the council on the Strategic Planning Committee for LTD. And as we know, LTD is going through some leadership changes. One of the things that we've been working on lately is building a long-range plan, if you will, for how transit is going to look over the next 10, 15, 20 years in our community. So the basic question is this: how aligned is our CRO program with what we are talking about at the SPC, and also what is the effect that other partners in the LTD framework that are not necessarily participating at the levels we would like, affecting the planning and how we move forward with that?
So the Strategic Planning Committee that Councilor Evans serves on advises the Lane Transit District Board of Directors. And there's a few different initiatives underway that I think are in alignment with the CRO. Maybe, you know, I can't tell you quantitatively if they're going to get us there, but they're moving us in that direction. So there's the electrification of LTD's fleet that I talked about earlier. But probably even more important than that is people choosing to ride the bus instead of driving. And LTD had an initiative underway called Transit Tomorrow that was put on hold because of COVID. So they're going to be picking that up again later this year. And that'll be an opportunity to relook at the proposals they had for more frequent transit service on key corridors. And that really aligns with Envision Eugene and our land use strategy for the city, because it's really important that the land use and the transportation work together. So that's something to look for, and we could bring back to you at some point is what they end up calling the new version of Transit Tomorrow. The technical term for it is a comprehensive operations analysis. There's also the Moving Ahead project, and we'll be likely bringing a recommendation back to you for that probably early next year for Moving Ahead. I guess the last thing I'll just mention is in the short term, LTD is having challenges just with hiring bus drivers, and that's a national issue. So it is limiting their ability to provide the service that they would like to provide. The last thing they're working on is something called the Mobility management strategy, and you'll hear about that at next week's strategic planning committee. And that's also a real partnership opportunity between the city and LTD, because it's looking at those things like micromobility and shared bikes and shared scooters and how they integrate with LTD's service.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Okay, thank you all. I really very much appreciated this presentation and this discussion. And I think, you know, we're all of like mind. We want to do the right thing for this community. We want to have clean energy. We want to have quality housing that's warm enough in winter and cool enough in the summer. And we want to, you know, enable our economy to grow and to grow using clean energy. So I think, you know, really appreciate the work and very much look forward to the conversation with EWEB next week, and then the subsequent conversations and what you'll bring back to us in November and December will be really, really helpful to help us continue to define that path and make those investments. So very much appreciated. Thank you all. And with that, we are adjourned.